Juanita, the FTTH Council Africa is a new non-profit organisation that really focuses on the fibre optic telecommunications market here in South Africa. Tell us a little bit more about the organisation and why it was formed.
Thank you, Duncan. About a year ago, 10 of the companies in South Africa that is very involved in the fibre deployment industry in South Africa came together and decided to start up the sister organisation to the FTTH Council Europe, Asia Pacific and North America. We subsequently formed the non-profit organisation in Africa, and part of our mission and aims is to support local governments and national governments with policy and regulation. We look at things like standards, how best to deploy infrastructure, and how best we can support government in turn with said infrastructure deployments.
Okay. Now we're seeing a lot of investment in fibre optic infrastructure all over Africa at the moment. We're seeing all these new undersea cables that are happening here in South Africa. We're seeing a lot of investment in national metropolitan fibre networks. But the FTTH in FTTH Council stands for fibre to the home, and that's not something we've seen here in South Africa yet. Do you think that fibre to the home deployments in this market are realistic given our wide geographic spread?
I suppose it depends on who you talk to. However, I think we're still very busy with looking at metro infrastructure, and I think once we've got that in place, I think the future will dictate what will go to the houses. We've had some great announcements from companies such as i3 Africa. There are companies such as Metro Fibre Networks that have indicated that they're going to take fibre last mile. They will service business parks and residential estates. And there are, of course, many gated community companies that purely focus on taking infrastructure into the last mile. But I think that you know we've got to look back at what government's doing in those areas, and internationally we see that that's a key area where governments used to play. In South Africa, I think that governments can leverage off that infrastructure. We know that things like automated meter readings are important to them. You know, if you look at the chaos around electricity bills and water bills, and I think that they can partner in PPPs with these companies and say, how can we effectively take fibre end to end and make sure that everybody's got equal access to it. We also see that there's many applications that are coming as a result of the bandwidth that's becoming available. We've seen that there's the new Mtunzini link from Mtunzini to Gauteng is now available. And I think one of the key questions that we should ask ourselves is, what are the service providers going to do with all this additional bandwidth that's become available?
It really sounds to me like it's a case of we need to get these other elements in place before the fibre to the home part is really going to work.
Absolutely.
Get the national backhaul, the provincial and the metropolitan networks in place, and then start to think about these fibre networks into the home. But it'll happen, you think, at some point in the future.
Absolutely. I think it'll naturally migrate to a working model for ourselves.
Okay. Now, what do you think are some of the bigger challenges that this industry is facing, just in terms of getting this infrastructure in the ground?
There's a huge amount of challenges that the industry faces. I think one of the key areas where we would need support right now is our engagement with government. I think at a very high level, at national government, we would need some clear legislation that governs the industry. I think from a local authority point of view, things like standards. What does the trench look like? How deep should it be? And more importantly, how do you reinstate the road and ensure that we don't have all the potholes that the consumers are shouting about are handled effectively? But probably the most critical component at this stage where we are right now is the whole issue around the way leave system, and potentially automating that, or even centralizing it, or giving this to a body that can handle it and make sure that it is produced timeously and effectively.
Just explain what you mean by way leaves.
Way leave issue or right of way approval is typically a approval that local authorities provide network operators or companies that would physically trench the infrastructure. They would provide them with that to say, we know you are trenching in the road, these are the standards that you have to adhere to, and this is how you should reinstate the roads. We've seen the city of Tshwane they are proposing some bylaws. They are making it available for public participation in the 1st of July. and they are probably the front runner in the industry, coming up with something saying we cannot necessarily force everybody into the same trench, but we can tell you how to structurally trench in our infrastructure, and we've got to keep in mind that that is a state-owned asset, and that they've got a right to protect that infrastructure. So do the commuters.
Now, Juanita, in the area I live, I've had two operators coming down my street, one on one side, another on the other side of the street, both laying fibre. Does it make sense for this duplication of infrastructure investment, or should the operators really be working together to share the sort of in this trenching and sharing in the pipes that these fibre cables are going to be run in?
It's a very difficult area. I think firstly the market is probably not mature enough to do that yet. There are contentious issues such as who's at the top of the in the top of the trench, who's at the bottom of the trench, and then there are concerns around people that will potentially purposefully damage other companies' infrastructure while they've got access to the maintenance, because obviously you have to access your fibre infrastructure to do maintenance. But I think this is an area where we need to take back a couple of steps and look again at national government, where we've got the historical dominator Telkom that already owns all the infrastructure in the ground.
Yes.
And we have to ask the question on why that has not been made available for other companies to share, which would make all of this go away. One of the other things that are extremely important to remember is that 70% of your infrastructure cost lies in the physical trench. So you would think that there are grounds for sharing, and you would think that companies would come up for models, better models. And we have seen sharing taken place. We haven't seen it at the level that we would like to see it take place. And then, of course, like I mentioned, national government needs to probably look at Telkom, maybe even as a continuity strategy after the local loop and bundling, making those sleeves available.